So, welcome to our virtual art talk. I'm Dr. Bill Resnick. I am a Venice Family Clinic advisory board member, former clinic board member, and as well as a volunteer psychiatrist and part of the Venice Art Walk Curatorial Committee. Today, I'm excited to be joined by another curatorial committee member, art advisor Jacquie Israel of Art House LA. We are so excited to have all of you learn more about the amazing art in the auction while also supporting Venice Family Clinic's comprehensive medical and mental health services. So I started at Venice Family Clinic in 2002, and as the first staff psychiatrist at the time, I've been keenly aware of the emotional needs our patients have without the added stress of a global pandemic. We continue to be available for in-person crisis appointments while adhering to proper distancing measures. For our staff, the clinic already had a robust employee wellness initiative, which offers exercise challenges, tips on self-care, and healthy cooking ideas. Now we have amped up our efforts to take care of our front line by providing regular mindfulness and meditation classes and more self-care encouragement in our weekly emails. We also have identified wellness champions among the staff to ensure their colleagues are taking care of themselves, whether they are at the clinics or at home. And speaking of homes, mine showcases art from many Venice art walks, and I love that each piece also provided healthcare to those in need. My husband and I have probably purchased 30 or 40 works of art from Art Walk over the past several years, and we're eager to add some new pieces to the collection. We actually have our bids in on several already. And we're also eager to get some art advice. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Jacquie.
Thank you so much, Bill. Hi, I'm Jacquie Israel, and I'm excited to be here. In a minute, I'll be talking with two artists, both longtime supporters of Venice Family Clinic. After that, I'll be sharing some of my other favorite works in this year's auction. Before we begin, I need to take care of a bit of housekeeping. If you look below, you can see there's a Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window. Questions regarding my presentation will be answered live at the end of the panel. General questions about the clinic and Venice Art Walk will be answered through the Q&A function during the discussion. Also, I encourage you to use full screen mode while viewing to best see the artworks. Now, I'd like to introduce Chase of The Art of Chase, an artist whose iconic murals are very familiar to the Venice community. Hi, Chase. It's so great having you here. You're always fun and interesting to speak with.
Hi, Jacquie. How are you?
Good to see you. I'm good. Chase, I know you spent your formative years in Belgium, though lived in LA on and off as a teenager. Could you tell us a little about how you landed in Venice and what the first wall you made your own here was?
Sure. Well, in '87, actually, I lived in LA with my parents from ages 9 to 11. And my parents being quite eccentric, in Europe, they used to take me to Ibiza, so they were naturally attracted to Venice Beach. So you can imagine back in the 80s, it was super eccentric. And, I was always walking around, and then I got a chance to buy my first skateboard on the boardwalk and would kind of zigzag around and got inspired by so many things. Then after a few years, we moved back to Belgium, and skateboarding really became my life. So, that involves all the tricks and the magazines and the graphics and all the friendships I developed while hanging on the street. So it's that hanging on the street that then led me into tagging and graffiti. And then when I was 17 in the mid 90s now, I returned to LA to skateboard and kind of made my way here, this time on my own. Street art wasn't really a thing yet. I mean, there was things popping up in alleys and stuff, but I saw all the blank walls and I wanted to kind of step up from tagging into painting murals. So I hooked up my first wall in Venice in 1999 on a location that's on the screen right now on Pacific and Brooks. So this is one of the last iterations of that wall, but that was the first one in Venice, and boom, after that, airborne.
Love it. Well, I love how that wall always welcomes me to Venice. It always makes me happy when I see it. You've been involved with Art Walk for over a decade. In the past, you've donated works on canvas, though this year you're offering to create a mural for someone, which I think is super exciting. You've created murals in some incredible spots around the world, all over the US, Europe, and even Asia. Can you tell me how commissioning a mural for a personal or even professional space would work?
Yeah, it seems complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. But what I always like to point out is that I'm not sort of one of those my way or or the highway kind of artists. You know, I view every commission as a true collaboration with the client, and usually we start by having a meeting and looking at the wall in question, and then kind of loosely brainstorming and discussing design ideas and color. After that initial meeting, I kind of make a visualization superimposing some design concepts over a photograph of the space. And then if revisions are needed, I happily make them. Then it comes down to installing the mural, which usually happens over the course of a few days. Yeah, as we can see here, that's a mural at an office. That's CBS actually, CBS Television, their office space. So in the end, you know, I may be the creator of the work, but the client has to live with it. So my number one thing is to make them super happy.
That's wonderful. Are your murals planned out or are they more spontaneous? And how does your color palette come about?
Yeah, there's some happy accidents that can happen, but in the end, it's all really planned out. You know, whether we're working inside or outside in the garden or some other kind of space. I like to sample existing colors from the space in which the mural sits, and then add other colors. Like this is a good example to kind of give the color palette an intelligent and a mature feel. And I feel that usually works best in the end.
Well, I could say, as someone who has your murals on the interior and exterior of my house, I
This
can
is your
attest,
house.
there
That's
it
your
is, that's my garage. I can attest to the fact that they bring everyone who visits pleasure and definitely raises the level of positivity at my
house.
house. Chase, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today and for your very generous offer. I know anyone who gets one of your murals will be lucky and have a lot of fun in the process.
Fantastic. Jackie, thanks for having me, and good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
The next artist I'm excited to speak with is Jens Lucking, who's also a longtime supporter of Venice Family Clinic and has placed many memorable photographs in the auction. Hi, Jens. It's so nice to see you here today.
Hi, Jackie. Nice to see you. Thanks for having me.
I actually discovered your work at Venice Art Walk. Your piece Hammer Time, that's pictured there, was in the auction, and I love the vibrancy of that image as well as how it speaks to a woman's ability to get things done while also maintaining her femininity. I think the piece you placed in this year's auction called Indecent Exposure also speaks to a woman's personal power. I'd love to hear about that, but first, I'd love to learn about your connection to the art walk and why you like being a part of it.
I think it's my 7th year being part of the Venice Art Walk. And oh, sorry, I just looked at that picture. That was last year when we did a little workshop there. It's always a fantastic event with all the beautiful art, the live music, the food trucks and all that. And of course, this year, because of Corona, we have everything online, but we'll try and make it as fun as possible. And what I really like is that everything that the team does supports Venice Family Clinic, which is really an amazing local institution that does a lot of good work in the community. And I just live up the road from the headquarters here in Venice. So I'm really happy to be part of it every year.
Yes, it is a fantastic event. I agree. Your photos are so beautifully designed. Can you tell me a little about how you achieve such precision, such as are they spontaneous or do they take a lot of forethought? Also, how do you come up with your ideas?
It really depends. I mean, some things I have an idea, and like I wake up in the middle of the night. I always have a piece of paper next to me and write it down right away. Other times, it starts with an idea and then it takes a long process until I actually shoot the picture. As an example, the Hammer Time series, which now has 3 images in it, has taken 7 years so far. It's still a work in progress, but 7 years for 3 images. That gives you an idea of how long it can take, but not always. One thing that I really love doing is I want my pieces to make people happy. So if I can get a smile out of the person that puts my artwork on their wall, then that's what makes me happy. And I feel that life is serious enough, especially right now. So that's a big part of my work, to make people smile.
Well, your work honestly really makes me smile. Your images are so uplifting. And I love how the piece you contributed to this year's auction, Indecent Exposure, is both classic and modern at the same time. Can you tell me a little about how that photo came about?
Yeah, so this idea I had on a plane. I have a lot of ideas on planes for some reason. I wanted to show this specific moment of the woman exposing herself to the public, and the self-empowerment of that moment. But at the same time, I wanted to take the passers-by out of their comfort zone. I also picked a specific location for this image. The locals there have a reputation of being a bit miserable and grumpy by default. And you can see that in some of the reactions. They still look like that, but others can't help but crack a smile. So it was a really nice experience to shoot that. And it was, it's nice to see the juxtaposition between some of some people who are like, come on, this is funny, and they're laughing, and having the model go through this. It was a really special moment for both of us, for me as a photographer as well as for her.
Well, I'm thinking those locals are not grumpy anymore after you were there. So you did a good deed. It's been so nice learning more about your photos and your process. Thank you so much for being with me here today and for being a longtime supporter of the Venice Art Walk.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'll see you soon.
Yes, I hope so.
Bye, Jackie.
Bye. Jens Chase are only 2 of the talented artists we have in this auction of over 150 works. I encourage you to take the time and view them all, but in the meantime, I've selected 5 additional artists whose works I'd like to share with you today. I'm going to begin with Yumiko Glover, an artist whose work I wasn't familiar with before the auction. I was attracted to the color and energy in her painting pictured here, Transience 4, though knew there had to be an underlying story, which Yumiko kindly shared with me. It turns out Yumiko grew up in Hiroshima and heard stories throughout her childhood about people, even members of her own family, who survived the dropping of the atomic bomb. Those stories inspired Yumiko to focus her new series, Transience, on the preciousness of life. In her images, she's thinking beyond the lives that were lost solely in Hiroshima and Nagasaki to those lost in any wars, and also now because of the coronavirus. Some of the visual inspiration for this piece, Transience 4, comes from patterns and colors of vintage kimonos in which Yumiko imagines the role of women during the war. The palette is colorful and bright to emphasize the beauty of life instead of recreating the tragedies. Here, the different shades of pink were inspired by the colors of cherry blossoms, fragile flowers that bloom for only a short period of time in the spring. Such an aesthetic makes a strong impact and lasts in people's hearts and memories. Yumiko plans to continue exploring the idea of transience in a larger context, and I look very forward to seeing where it goes. Another artist whose work I love and excited to see in the auction is that of James Herman. James's 2-dimensional works are inspired by Frank Stella's early line-based paintings. While Stella used a house painter's paintbrush to set parameters for his paintings, James uses a tool called an electric router on plywood. He uses the tool to carve space between lines to create an echo or reverberation of sorts. It seems James has always been building things. As a kid, he would build sets for the performing arts he was involved in. When I first met him, James was living on an untamed compound-like property. He had built a home with sophisticated systems for off-grid living, even though he was only 10 minutes from downtown LA. After seeing that property, I realized James could probably turn any raw material into something magical. James's work relates to the minimalist movement in that he's using a ready-made industrial object, in his case, a piece of plywood, to create something new. He says there's a big payoff to the noisy task of removing 50% of the surface of the plywood. Like discovering ancient texts in a cave, James feels there's a hidden language embedded in the plywood where each piece has a story of its own. Karolina Maskowitz is another artist whose work I had the great pleasure of discovering at Venice Art Walk. Karolina, who's originally from Poland, shared that she's honored to be a part of an auction that supports Venice Family Clinic and always chooses one of her very favorite pieces for the event. Similar to James Herman, Karolina, who explores the connection between ready-made materials and the natural world. Her sculptures pair form with material, investigate balance, gravity, and how a viewer's presence influences the movement of the work. I love how the kinetic aspect of Karolina's work transfixes the viewer and creates a space for contemplation. This tabletop sculpture is from her series called Divining Rods. The focus here is on the concentrated simplicity of form and color. The piece, an abstract flower, a peace lily. In these challenging times, Karolina told me she wanted to pick a work that depicts the importance of taking care of the health of our world as one organism. She wanted to share something that has a dichotomy, a work that brings joy while also showing a part of nature in isolation. The next piece by Claudie Jongstra is one I'm elated to have in the auction. Since Claudie is a celebrated artist from the Netherlands, it's thrilling to have one of her coveted pieces here. I hadn't known anything about Claudie, but because I love textiles and fiber art, her work somehow made it into my inbox. The fine details of any artwork are hard to appreciate online, and that's especially true for Claudie's work because the rich texture and colors in her woven skins are such a big part of what makes her pieces so special. What Claudie does to create her work is unlike any artist I've ever heard of, and it's very focused on environmental preservation. She's mastered the ancient craft of making wool felt, which is humankind's earliest textile. In order to make the wool, Claudie maintains a large flock of rare sheep. She has a farm outside her studio where seeds she's acquired and developed from historical plants are distilled into natural pigments. She applies the dye from those plants onto the raw wool, bringing extinct colors back into the world's palette. Essentially, she's creating work with colors people have never seen before, which I think is pretty exceptional. I've seen her pieces create a warm, organic feeling in some beautiful spaces, and they're in many museum collections as well. All to say, Claudie Jongstra is a highly innovative artist who's created new territory for wool as a contemporary artistic medium. The last artist I'm going to talk about today is Arielle Dill. I've been a fan of Arielle's work for years, having discovered it in New York City's Turn Gallery, and was excited to see it in the auction. I didn't know much about her background, and when we spoke, I was surprised to discover her artist parents have been longtime contributors to Art Walk. They may have even been involved in the very first one, as she remembers hearing about it way back in preschool. I knew Arielle had been living in New York. She told me she moved back to LA because it was getting harder to have separate studio space for herself and her husband, also an artist with a piece in the auction. Having a 3-year-old daughter who also enjoys painting, along with family in LA, made the move back easier to make. Arielle told me living here allows for more freedom in her work. She can create anytime, anywhere, inside, outside. Her work doesn't just have to happen in the studio anymore. When I asked about the piece in the auction, Arielle explained that it's from a series called Cosmic Spring and is about the ground waking up. The colors she used are completely spontaneous and came about in the process. When viewing her work, Arielle wants us to experience a sense of familiarity, as well as the feeling of seeing something for the very first time. I love that sentiment, and it's usually what attracts me to a work of art to begin with. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope I provided insight into some of the incredible pieces in this auction and that you can take the time to experience the wonder of them all. Now, I think we have time for a few questions. Okay, here's a question. The question is, I've loved learning about the various artists and would love to do more of that. How do you suggest I do that? My answer is one fun way to do that is to get out and visit galleries, which you can find all over the city. When you go, ask questions, ask as many questions as you want, and ask about anything you don't understand. Artists make their work to be appreciated and engaged with, so don't be intimidated. A gallery is a place of business, and the people who work there are happy to help you. I think I have time for one last question, and that is there an art form you think is making a noticeable emergence right now? I would say, as the world is changing, that works by artists in traditionally underrepresented populations are getting long overdue, well-deserved attention. Also, makers of textiles and more craft-like works are of interest as the digital age is driving people to seek out things that show evidence of human touch. That's what I'm seeing. Well, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you again for joining me. Please reach out to the Venice Family Clinic Events Committee with any additional questions, as they'd be delighted to help you. You can also direct questions about our wonderful visitors, Jens Lucking and Chase of the Art of Chase their way. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to spend time at the auction.